welcome to the first in what might be a new series. We'll see how it goes. Is in community feedback. So what we do twice a week in our Facebook group for all our athletes who are on our programs is we do feedback live streams where people post their videos in the comments and we go through that, and some of it's just questions, some of it's are powerlifters, some of it's are athletes, a lot of it's are weightlifters posting their videos for technique, and they post stuff and we give feedback. And we wanted to do something for people who might not be on our programs because it's very, very productive, because something we've noticed over many years of coaching is that most people have mostly the same problems. Most people have like the 5 same things wrong with their lifting. So we want to use this as an opportunity for you to get something out of this. So we've picked about 5 or 6 lifts from the list. Don't feel disheartened if we didn't pick you. All of them could have been useful, but we felt these were the most useful for the biggest cohort of people probably watching this. So we want to get the most amount of people, get the most amount out of this video. So we've picked a couple of different things that are diverse enough that we can get some common problems that you might be able to see in your own lifting, and then you can go fucking hopefully go and apply it to your own lifting. So first up, we've got Jared Meyer. Jared Meyer, right, had 1,000 views, and I was like, why does this have 1,000 views if he's posting a thread? But then I just googled his name, just wondering, and I don't know if he's an NHL player. I could be right. I could be very, very wrong.
National Hockey League.
Possibly. I'm not sure.
Right.
But anyway, that's irrelevant to the lift, because Jared is a great example of a very
very
limmy lifter.
Yeah.
So I've spoken enough there. So do you want to go first, Jared? Do you want to watch? You've seen. Do you want to?
Yeah. So Jared, there's a number of things that make lifting weights as a tall, limmy lifter a lot more difficult. The first one, if we were to start off at the start of his pull, is getting your knees out of the way. So ideally, in like ideal biomechanical circumstances, that bar is going as straight as possible. In most practical circumstances, you want the barbell to actually move backwards off the floor. So backwards towards your center of mass off the floor. And if you have long legs, getting your knees out of the way is the first challenge you come across. What you see as a really common mistake with taller lifters, and this is due to a different fact, the fact that taller lifters tend to be more posteriorly dominant than they do anteriorly dominant. What you see is they get their hips too low in the start position. And you see this with Jared's. His hips, like he's almost sitting in the bottom of a squat before he starts to pull. What he'd ideally want to do here is start with his hips significantly higher than his knees. Depending on people's ratios here, you might get hips the same height as knees. You might get hips 3 inches above the knees. In Jared's case, his hips would want to be a lot higher above his knees, and his shoulders would want to be a lot further in front of the bar. Once he then starts pulling on the bar, he'll still have to work hard to get his knees back and out of the way, and he'll have to work hard to make sure that bar doesn't move forward off the floor. But that is the first thing he wants to do. Get your hips higher, get your knees back a tiny bit, and your shoulders further forward, and then start pulling backwards on the bar as it comes up off the floor.
So the main thing, Jarrett, actually could be Jarrett, is you'll see that we're terrible at pronouncing people's names. More often than not, we get it wrong. But the main thing you want to see is Jarrett's hips will need to be above parallel, somewhere like this, or slightly, maybe even a little bit of, like a significant amount above parallel. So he'll need to feel that tension in his legs in the pull position, and that will give him the best opportunity then to pull that barbell straight back off that ground. So we talked about what video did we talk about the kind of classic mistakes most people make. So we made a video last week, and I can't remember which one it was, where we talked about just going out, my snatch progression. So looking for the very classical savvy technique that most countries will teach in their level 1s and stuff, teaching to varying degrees now. The Germans do it to a phenomenal degree. They teach technique, I think, the best, the most consistently of any country that I know of right now. So that kind of classic S-bar pat, and then conforming as much as you can to the lifter while still aiming for that good bar pat. So Jared, as you can see, if you were to visualize his bar pat, we might do that next time we do one of these, but you can see Jared's bar would literally loop out like this, literally in the opposite direction of where you want that bar pat to go for the snatch and the clean. So you'd want to see that bar pat going directly back to you in a nice curve, and then it loops out a little bit in the extension and then under the grin. So Jared really needs to fix that start position and then adjust that backwards pull. So great overhead, or great bottom position for a tall lifter.
Yeah.
He looks significantly tall for lifting, I would think.
Yeah.
Right, next up we have got Julie. I assume that's just Julia. Could be wrong again.
Could be wrong.
Julia with snatching, crossfitting in 910s, I think.
Are they nano 10s?
I think it's 10. I think it's 10s. Yeah.
I had nano 3s and I don't feel like it's that long ago.
The world moves fast, buddy.
Yeah.
Looking at Julia's positions, right? Her pull is actually quite good. Bottom position is quite good as well. But we've got that start position issue again, where most people have that issue, where she's starting from the bottom of the squat essentially, and then she's lifting herself up into that start position. Then she's like aggressively jerking the barbell off the ground, so we see that kind of 1-2 pump with the arms. It's not an ideal one. You do see some lifters do it, but you don't really see it a whole lot, as you're kind of priming the wrong muscles, you're loading the wrong things. So typically what we want to see in a dynamic start is hips swing down into the barbell. So pre-stretched muscles produce more force. It's something that is kind of very, very useful for weightlifting. There's, obvious studies from the 80s. So what I'd really like to see here, and what typically causes this issue for people not being able to hold that very, very good start position, is that their legs are quite weak and it's hard for them to hold that position at parallel with their knees. So it's hard for them to load up their quads in that start position. So first place I would start is a much smoother dynamic start. So a much smoother start position where you're loading your quads and you can just get that back tight. So you can still do a dynamic start, absolutely. So just swing those hips gently down or a little bit aggressively down into that start position. Hold it for a second in that new position where you actually start from, and then start to pull from there.
I think that's going to fix a hell of a lot of the issues that you might see here, right? If you look at one other issue that might be happening, is just at the contact. So at contact at the hip, there's a good acceleration into the contact, but there's no real concerted upper body work, right? This is something that in weightlifting coaches disagree on hugely, but if you're being realistic, you have to be recruiting upper body musculature, not to get the bar higher, but to ensure that bar stays close to you as it goes overhead. So the next thing I would look at, besides the start position, is really getting into that kind of upper back recruitment after the bar makes contact with the hips. It's just like what we call it is working harder in the third pull or finishing your pull better. It'll give you more control. It'll make the snatch feel an awful lot stronger when you catch it overhead. But yeah, besides that, the lift looks pretty good.
So one last thing is I would wear your weightlifting shoes all the time, Julia, and be a lot more aggressive with your foot movement. So that's probably the least priority right now before you fix those things, but that would be definitely something needs to be done.
Yeah, the lift looks so much better when you're wearing legacies.
So next up we've got someone called Tresden Johnson. He was doing the under 25 national championships. Is that a thing in America?
I thought under 23s was about as old as it got.
Under 25s must be,
yeah,
obviously. So Tresden did a 290 total. So we're got a lot of his backroom footage there. So we're just going to skip towards some of the heavier stuff. So let's get up to around 110 there and see. Okay, his last warm up. We'll go a little bit further than that. So we'll just try to watch the warm ups. So about 9 minutes out. So Dresden, obviously very good lifter, nice and fast. So for me, I think the main thing that jumps out at me from Dresden's lifting is because his grip is so wide, and that looks like he needs that. He's quite a limmy lifter, but he's obviously in quite good shape, and he's obviously talented at lifting. Is you can kind of see that there is something I really don't like to see, and there is a little bit of a wrist curl backwards, but also a bit of an arm pull at the top. So we've helped a good few lifters with this, with very wider limmier limbs, I suppose, or longer arms, or making higher contact, is that sometimes people just aren't built to make contact in that hip pocket like the vast majority of people are. Someone like Dresden, he's obviously quite tall, so we're more than happy, and it works very, very well for people, is if you make that contact, leave out that last couple of inches of contact in the upper thigh. So literally make that kind of thigh brush. It's something Gabriel talks about, where he makes contact earlier on and keeps that contact closer, and he doesn't worry about making contact only at the hip. So let that contact come in a little bit sooner, and then don't worry about it getting all the way into the pocket. Don't force that upper contact at a higher contact point with an early arm bend, because it ultimately, any benefits you get from that higher contact point are negated, or potentially even on a negative from the arm bend you quite have.
The next thing I'd say is just looking at the catch position. Dresden, in a huge amount of his warm-ups and even on the platform, his feet are jumping very, very wide, and he tends to be like a very hippie squatter. So he's just missing a small bit at the bottom of his squat. I think if there was a small bit more quad recruitment in his squat and his knees got a bit further forward in the catch, might just be more consistent. We don't see any like missed lifts here, or I don't think we do anyway. So it's hard to know where he would miss. But I think one thing he might be missing out on is like his knees are barely going in front of his toes when he's squatting. If he was to work on that a small bit more and get those toes a small bit straighter ahead, he could just get more quad recruitment in his catch and might be better overall, like in terms of going from 125 to 140 or 150.
Okay, as well, we can see just a tiny little bit jump forward from the stage angle, okay? And I think where that's very, very likely coming from on the 125 is, and a very natural reaction to heavier weights, is he's just cutting his extension a little bit short with the lower limbs. Now, you know, we've done videos on Plesi and on Plesi talking about the clean extension. Typically in the snatch, though, full extension is what you really need to aim for, as close to full extension. So I'd like to see Dresden just get a little bit more vertical in his extension for just a little bit longer. Taller lifters obviously have to lift the barbell higher, so he needs to get that a little bit higher and get a little bit more force in the barbell. So I'd be looking for just a little bit straighter extension. Interesting to see the differences between better lifters, more advanced lifters. The technique stuff is more nuanced, but it's always work to be done. We'll get a look at Dresden's cleans because there's a few things as well that could, again, coming back to that start position, great shape.
In very good shape.
Yeah. So
his clean is not what I expected his clean to look like.
Better or worse?
Better than what I expected.
So my main issue with Dresden's clean is, again, that's the start position. The start position obviously is the most important place you want to start with, essentially, because it can fuck up the whole rest of the lift. So I really don't like that start position where people drop their hips down and swing their shoulders behind the barbell and then start pulling as they readjust into that position. So clean is quite good, the pull under is good, and the timing and the stand up from the catch is a great, very, very good clean. You can see that he's really getting the whip in the barbell. But what I'd really like to see is when he's setting up in that position is he's keeping his shoulders in front of the barbell or just on top of the barbell for the whole setup. So not pulling himself backwards in that position, because essentially it's a useless amount of range of motion. So there's a lot of degrees of motion. He's bringing his torso back through just to get into a position to lift the barbell from. There's no point doing that. And it causes what is a very, very big issue in most people's clean start positions is a lack of consistency in start position. So you want to do the most repeatable and most consistent start position in your lifts, and in the clean is very, very important, especially at heavier weights. And this adds too many variables and too many potentials to kind of fuck it up. So I'd be looking for keeping those shoulders in front of the barbell or just on top of the barbell and never behind the barbell in that dynamic start.
I think at the very top of Dresden's clean, so Dresden's clean, I expected there to be like some amount of rowing in, purely due to the fact that he was rowing in on his snatches, right? At the top, he does a really good job of keeping elbows straight, making contact in the correct position. But to be honest, I think his shoulders, he emphasizes shoulders coming back instead of him getting tall a bit too much. So I think if he was to emphasize a very vertical extension, an extension like you'll see Gabriel making, he might just get more kilos out of that same amount of power, same amount of training. He'll just get more vertical height on the bar, and it'll be able to easier to pull under. Is this 165?
Yeah. So a lot of potential.
Yeah. Really good lifts.
Great jerk.
Yeah, it's good.
So next up,
same setup again. Yeah, so obviously you've watched the rest of the video. We won't talk about the setup because that's something you really need to change. What we might focus on, what's this person saying?
This is, it's Rogue.
So I might just focus on a small bit more here is the jerk, just to give you a small bit of more scope, right? The first issue here in the jerk, this is especially an issue with female lifters and lighter weight class lifters, is they tend to want to jerk in a front squat position. So they want to be able to jerk, dip, and put a lot of power into the bar. If they were to do that with lower elbows, they feel like their chest will dip forward. So they emphasize this high elbow position. That's incorrect. So if you imagine when you start to drive up, you'll then have to drop your elbows. And then once your elbows drop down, you can start to drive up again. What you're looking for is something in between a normal pressing position and a front squat position. For a lot of people, that's going to be around 45 degrees with a relatively straight wrist. For some of the lighter weight class lifters, you're going to see something just above 45 degrees. But that's the main thing I would focus on, just in terms of getting better mechanics, better timing in your jerk, is drop your elbows down significantly.
So then I'd focus on after that is the amount of time you spend in the bottom of the dip. So there's a lot of pause, but I'd like to see how that would change if you're in a better position, because the higher elbows does kind of change from dip and drive. So you want to see it as fast as possible going from a dip and a drive. So if you imagine your dip and drive is like a spring, the faster you compress that spring and the faster you let it go, the higher the spring will bounce. But if you compress that spring, hold it in the bottom position, it won't go as high. So imagine your legs are like those springs, so you need to compress it as fast as possible and let it go as fast as possible. So down and up as fast as you can without losing positions, of course. So the next lift we actually have is a very, very good example of the clean and jerk. So we've got Flex Armillo. I'm not even sure if that's his name. So he did 109 and 150 by the looks of things, which is an incredibly strange ratio.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot wrong with his snatch, so I'd like some more context on why his snatch isn't what... I really want to see the front angle of this snatch in clean jerk. Sorry, from the snatch. So it's 109. So the main issue with Flex's turnover is he is turning over way, way, way too early. So if you imagine, a lot of times you see people do very heavy muscle snatches, you'll see that they turn over the barbell super early and it turns into a clean and kind of fast clean and press. So same thing's happening here with Flex's positions. So you can see his pull is... I really like his pull. I like his dynamic start. That's exactly what we're talking about, what people need to be doing. But you can see Flex is turning over way, way too early. And the issue then with that is that you are losing all ability to keep pulling on the barbell as you turn it over. So that's the main thing I'd really be looking at.
Like, we frequently talk about needing to be patient in the second pull. Flex really needs to focus on that of like getting tall, finishing the pull all the way through, and then getting under the bar.
115 looks nice loaded, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So Flex obviously has a load of power for more snatching, more leg strength, more ability, more mobility for that. But his main issue is that kind of lack of ability to translate that into a powerful or effective third pull.
I wonder, did Flex do a load of power cleans and cleans for a different sport and then transfer it into weightlifting?
Maybe. So you can see Flex is that kind of fast roll off the ground, which is not ideal. The rest of the pull is quite good, but you definitely want to eliminate that barbell rolling off the ground. They reckon like every kilo is probably worth about 10, or every centimeter forward is about 10 kilos onto the barbell weight. So it's not what you want.
The main issue with the jerk, just to move on from the clean for a sec, the main issue I'd see with that jerk is the tempo of the dip and drive. So if you want to think about the dip and drive being like you're loading a spring, right? What's happening with Flex at the moment is he's dropping in. There's a pause in that, like what you'd call an amortization phase. There's a pause there and the bar almost shocks him and then he comes back up again. So all of that loading of potential energy, loading up of that stretch shortening cycle and those muscle tendon units is kind of being put to waste because there's almost a pause in the bottom of the dip. How you get around that is obviously by doing more jerks, more front squats, heavier front squats. But what you really need to focus on is dipping at a speed that you're able to turn around quickly. So you might have to slow down the speed he's actually dipping at so he's not as jarred in that bottom position, and then he'll be able to use that kind of that bounce out of the bottom a hell of a lot more effectively.
Okay, last lift we're going to look at is Matt basically doing a barefoot snatch out in the woods somewhere. There's not really take this, I just wanted to show people. Thanks for watching, guys. I really hope people got something out of this. If there's something you recognize in your lifts here, post in the comments, because it's interesting for us to see if you're kind of gelling what we're saying, if you're understanding what we're saying to you, and you can kind of see it in your own lift. So if you see yourself pausing the dip, let us know. If you see us knocking the barbell away, if you see us in a weak start position, let us know in the comments, because it's interesting to see. We will be doing one of these. We'll be taking some of the strength movements and doing another one of these for next week. Probably sometime later this month or probably next month we'll do another thread with this stuff. So have your videos and stuff ready, and we will try to pick another few different people. Thanks for watching, guys.
If you're interested in video feedback like this and you want to get on one of our programs, as Owen said earlier on in the video, we do live streams twice a week, very, very similar to this, with all our athletes that are in that Facebook group. All you have to do is you have to be on a weightlifting, a powerlifting, an off-season athlete program, or any of the standalone strength programs. Super simple. You get added to the group, you submit your videos into a thread twice a week, and you can basically get this as often as you want. Thanks very much for watching.